Salapia, please allow me to seek my blog talk radio at www.blogtalkradio.com/the-divine-prince. You can also call in and listen in at area code 84. Again, the number is 845-277-9143. Do press the number 1 when you're ready with your questions, comments, and requests. I will unmute your mic. I will be forward right after the music stops. Please be patient. All is a blessing. Greetings, welcome, greetings, come on in, welcome. Another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Come on in, greetings, YouTube Live, please do be patient. Allow my blog talk radio listeners to settle in. You too can call in and by way of area code 845-277-9143. 845-277-9143. Your voice, your question, your comment will be heard now here live on air. Otherwise, you can write your questions and comments in all capital letters in both platform chat rooms so that I may be able to distinguish them, so that the monitors may be able to assist me in addressing your questions or comments during the live broadcast. My live call-in number is 845-277-9143 to be a part of the Blog Talk Radio platform. YouTube Live, I welcome you. I greet you. Greetings. All is a blessing. Greetings, 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 Alafia, greetings, divine, all blessed, peace and love, serenity and tranquility on this day. You are now listening live to the Divine Prince and always in archive at your leisure and convenience on two platforms on my YouTube live by way of youtube.com/voodoo Thai and also by way of my blog talk radio platform at blogtalkradio.com /the divine prince. Remembering that all is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. This is my constant prayer, my personal mantra, affirmation, reverberation, and it is my ever living reality. It is crucial to the very foundation of my understanding, my being, my walk, my work, my teachings along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, the Divine Prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father Earth. And it is my personal place of power and understanding. It is the place from where I begin. It is the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co-create my divine destiny. And I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe, Asheo, Ashe. I welcome each and every one of you, both individually and collectively, this Monday, December 23rd, 2019. I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you, live, virtually, verbally, cosmically, quantum, universally from this working temple of the House of Divine Prince. Thai Potions, Hoodoo Central, Voodoo Thai. I, I'm trying to read and talk and respond and not respond to people at the same time. And I'm here today to, as always, share with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from my Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist perspective, understanding that all is truly and indeed a thing. If you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. I am here today to bring a message, as I always am, but then spirit takes over, ancestors get involved, the participants here in my live chat rooms in both my Blog Talk Radio and my YouTube Live get involved. And then we have a organic show about revolutionary hoodoo, New Orleans voodoo secrets and recipes. So before I start responding to your typed questions, comments, and requests, and of course go to the phone lines, I want to take just a quick moment to sort of lay a foundation. You've heard me say many times now, the veils are thinnest during the holiday season. The veils are thinnest between Halloween and Mardi Gras Day. And so we not only experience family and celebration and many of you, happiness and joy and prosperity and sort of a sharing and gifting in your prosperity. It's real easy for us to forget that many people in the world don't celebrate this holiday, don't acknowledge this holiday, don't acknowledge many of the beliefs and traditions and myths and religious systems behind the holiday. So the veils are thinnest at this time of the year. People are in their feelings, up feelings, down feelings, but people are feeling some kind of way. And it is indeed this time that many of the ghosts within our families, within our bloodlines, rise up, show up at the family dinner, show up at the buffet, show up at the party, much like Gede, who shows up uninvited always, to mock civilization, always to mock those who sort of think they're contained and withholding their deepest, darkest secrets, only to remind us that our ancestors are involved in everything. In everything. There's a saying in ancestral honoring worship: when we eat, they eat. When we drink, they drink. And those who are in my audience who are among my godchildren or even among my clients who've done ancestral work and divination, you know what I'm referencing. And that is the ever presence of the ancestors with us, around us, up until modern times, 20 years ago. This was sort of ethereal and spiritual and held to the realm of seances and Egun ceremonies and the like. But now, with the support of science, we understand that ancestral memory survives the DNA. One of the toughest questions that I have to answer, that I have to clarify often for many people, is in the acknowledgement of people that you consciously have a negative connection to or negative memory to within your family or within your bloodline. And how then do we go about ancestral worship with that understanding, with that information in our head? And I often take them right back to this Jacob's ladder, this DNA symbolism, that indeed we can't separate not only from the family that we think we know or we think we have a beef with or we think we have some kind of issue with, have suffered some kind of egregious offense, abuse, molestation, etc. But there's also a much bigger array of ancestors that we don't even know by name. We don't even know by face. We don't even know by conscious memory. One of the first things I learned in doing my Ancestry.com and my 23andMe, which is on everything right now, every TV program, every daytime talk show, has some reference back to it. So some of you are waiting on that $59, $69, $79 opportunity to jump in there and get it. This is your window of opportunity. And this typically happens at Christmas. Many of these companies are in competition and they're offering some of their best and lowest deals, 2-for-1s and all that kind of stuff. So please take this opportunity to follow the lead of Wendy Williams and myself and many others and have your DNA done. The idea that we must cut off, eliminate, remove those who have somehow aggrieved us or offended us or left a mark on the family is something that's indeed a human response. It's an emotional mechanism to self-preservation, to self-protection. The truth is the spiritual person, and be clear because I'm being very specific with my words right now, the spiritual person, I'm not talking necessarily about the person who's spiritual and not necessarily religious. I'm talking about indeed the spiritual person. There are certain divine laws that come with being the spiritual person. Now, whether you agree or not, I'm not here to debate it. I didn't create them. I didn't write them. They are what they are. And there are absolute laws in the spirit realm that are unmutable, unchangeable, that are fixed. And then there are relative truths, relative laws that apply to your scenario, to your situation, to where you are in any given point in time in history, to what you know, to what you understand. That's why it's commonly said that once you come into the light, you cannot go back into darkness. Once you truly understand something. See, it's one thing to understand something, to be able to read it, to see it, no smoking, do not touch, don't, push this button. We see signs, warning signs, red placards all throughout life, figuratively and literally. We see people now at this point in society, who've done drugs, who smoke crack, who's smoked meth, who's done all sorts of things. So it does not require all of us now to live out that experience to gain some relative truths about it. And so there are relative truths that exist within the spirit realm. Being positive is a relative truth. Being positive. Now how important does that become depending on your scenario? Some scenarios are harder to be positive under. Some scenarios require more of us than others to be happy, to be joyful, to be at peace. And often, if we are not tested, then we don't really know to what extent we are capable of, or our skill set, other than our experience. And we see this mirrored in athletics, we see this mirrored in other skilled arts and crafts and sciences, learning to play an instrument, learning to dance, learning to be good at something. There's a trial and error. There's a relative truth that is acted out through trial and error, through practice. And keeping in mind the law based in string theory that all energy was created once at the creation of the universe, at the Big Bang. So indeed, all energy is here. There's a certain permanence to energy, though it can be transferred, it can be recycled as our food is, grabs its energy from the sun and from the soil and from the earth and from the water, and then we ingest that, and then becomes another form of energy, and then we emit it out back into the creation. It becomes another form of fertilizer or energy, and the cycle, if you will, continues. So the idea that those things that bring us pain, those things that bring us discomfort, those things that show up as a challenge or problematic to us are somehow something that we should work to expunge, to eliminate, to remove, ever crossing, that vibration again, is a bit lofty once you understand what energy is. I think another way to explain it that might be more familiar is the person who dates in a pattern, who befriends in a pattern, who finds their life repeating certain patterns. And for those who are indeed spiritual, truly spiritual, and understand I can talk about many things at once and stay on target. It's sort of the mechanism of my wiring. I know I said I was going to go into much more detail about the difference between being spiritual, being spiritual, and sort of the idea of spiritual versus something, usually religion. So the idea of sort of expunging out energy, particularly if we're talking about ancestors, it's much easier for us to make sense of it if we think about genetic codes, if we think about T cell deformities, like sickle cell, for instance, which is a disease that is more prevalent in African Americans, and it so has a parent combination that has to take place. So one parent has a carrier of this genetic malady, the other parent is a carrier of it, and then you birth a child that is now that much more likely to be born with sickle cell. So that might be an extreme way of looking at it. But even our phobias, our fears, our taste in food, your sensibilities to hot or cold, your sensibilities to spicy or sweet, can absolutely be carried on in the genetic material, the Jacob's ladder, the DNA structuring from our parents. And we see this mirrored in Hoodoo. We see this mirrored in an EFI demonstration where you have a parent hand, if you will, and then another parent hand, and then that is married together, and then a new child is born, a new Voodoo is born, a new power is born, and that is specific to a particular person, place, thing, and location in time. Understanding that time is very specific to where you are at any given moment, physically, but also ethereally and figuratively. So the holidays and this doorway being open that I keep talking about, and the veils being thin, and people coming into their feelings. And let me be clear for my new listeners and my new viewers, I'm not talking so much philosophically right now, though I teach in a sort of philosophical order. I'm also teaching from my experience. This isn't what I've read in a book. This isn't necessarily what all I consume just in sitting at the feet of elders, sitting at the feet of teachers in the learning process. This has also been a part of my own experience. So I don't want to ever give the appearance that I am entirely divine and that I don't experience humanity and humanity at the same degree as you do. And so holidays are very problematic for me, particularly these particular holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Those are particularly problematic. And for some of you, even Valentine's Day, which falls before Mardi Gras Day. I said the veil was thinnest between Halloween and Mardi Gras Day. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Mardi Gras culture, Mardi Gras Day moves around every year a little bit. It is contingent on a system that is out of the frame of reference for the average person who's not Catholic or is not in a culture or community where Carnival and Mardi Gras indeed are celebrated. But it follows, sort of the storyline of 12 Days of Christmas. So it falls right into your new year and many of the coldest, darkest months, which is what winter solstice is all about for the northern hemisphere. And so there are doorways that are open, doorways that are gapped open during this time of year that create emotions and dark feelings, and our vegetation even symbolically goes away, figuratively and literally goes away the further north of the equator you are, giving a much more intense sense of death, birth, and rebirth and resurrection. Uh, that is a concept that we talked about in most recent days too, as it relates to roots and hoodoo, the understanding of the process of death, birth, and resurrection, particularly with root plants, root vegetables, like your tulips, for instance, that require a bulb, a root bulb to be planted during the winter months, during the darker, colder winter months, allowing for it to be properly fertilized and cared for and nurtured when the spring and the summer months and the sun returns, and then we get the greenery and we get the flower. So there are indeed divine laws entrenched in much of what we identify today as hoodoo and root work and conjure. But the truths behind it are often lost if we are not willing to do sort of this work into where these traditions come and how they continue to sustain themselves now in the present in the new world. And if I haven't said so, please put your questions in all capitals so that I can separate them from your greetings and the other conversation on platforms, and I will acknowledge them here live on air. So the idea of parts of our ancestry that we don't know or that we don't understand or we don't comprehend goes hand in hand with indeed the dealing with that which we do know and we do understand, which might bring some sense of pain or darkness or challenge to us. In my own experience, and indeed that I pass on to those who work with me in ancestral work, I've dealt with my own issues of family and pain and background and tragedy directly and specifically with the ancestors. There is indeed no one, no power, no entities that knows you or your family better than those who are connected, blood linked to you in terms of your bloodline, your ancestry. This is not about worshiping the dead. This is not about, you know, necromancy, if you will. For indeed, we are not elevating or seeking to feed or placate those who've done harm or brought harm to your family, to your bloodline, who've done egregious things throughout history, both the history that we know and all of our most recent knowledge and that of our living relative knowledge, but then that which we don't know. We talk about slave ancestors, for instance, and we talk about house nigga and field nigga, and we get very aggressive and descriptive and specific, and at the same time generalize and overgeneralize, not understanding that you're a part of that group. We're all a part of that group, house and field. We're all a part of that group. The notion that, you know, the only life that matters is this one is a very new concept in terms of the world time and in terms of world culture. And some systems, like Hinduism, for instance, is very detailed and very descriptive about past life and how that works and our connection to mineral life, plant life, the animal kingdom, etc., and the cycle of reincarnation. It is not always as overt and openly explained in a way that's clear to our Western ear today when we look at Africa or South America or other parts of the world. But the more I study and the deeper we study, the more we find these contagious lines of connection, communication, symbolism that bring about an awareness of some universal knowledge that is lost to us still and is just in recent times, and archaeology is beginning to sort of piece together the connection. I can remember a time when we talked about pyramids, and we only talked about it in the reference to Egypt. Having been born in Illinois, having been raised in the state of Maryland, knowing for myself that other mounds, other pyramids existed, and then not hearing that discussed, really not until the time of Coast to Coast AM. Some of you may be familiar with Coast to Coast AM, which I believe still airs at night on talk radio. I'm not quite as obsessed with Coast to Coast AM today as I was during the Art Bell years, the original host of Coast to Coast AM. But Coast to Coast AM is a overnight talk show that comes on one of those conservative talk radio networks that you probably never listen to because you think it's all, you know, conservative, you know, mumbo jumbo and conversation. But at night, typically 10, 11, and then during like a 4-hour time span, they would then move to this Coast to Coast AM. And I believe that's spelled coast, you know, like the coast of a country, COAST, to the Roman numeral 2, and then coast again, and then am.com. That might be their website. And it's an all-night program, and they discuss everything from ghosts to faith healing to alien intervention to the government being involved in psychic investigations and remote viewing and conspiracy theories and government and war conspiracies, all kind of things. Things that I would find interesting. Many of you in this audience might find interesting. So it's a platform that for many years mirrored and might even be a source of some of my congealing of ideas and thoughts and then bringing them forward in a way that I can share them with other people. So the idea that we are only operating, I'm going back to my spirit comment, only operating in spirit or in things that are spiritual for ourselves. And often ourself translates into that which is carnal, that which feeds our most immediate need, our most immediate gratification, and anything that goes beyond that. There's a saying in indigenous American culture that you only harvest, you only take from nature that which you need in that moment in time space. They didn't harvest large quantities of fish or large quantities of fruits and vegetables and produce during that time in order to stock and storehouse and sort of hoard, if you will. So the idea that we access spirit and spirituality for just that is a more modern notion. Being spiritual indeed transcends beyond you, transcends beyond your most immediate needs, transcends beyond just what's happening in the moment for you and around you and with you, and permeates throughout your bloodline, your genealogy. So any blockage that you set up now becomes a blockage that's set up in the continuum of energy through your bloodline. Any opening, any blessing, any stronghold that you break now, any curse that you break now is then set up and left open and broken for those who then follow you, who then come behind you. Now people can create new bounds, create new strongholds, create new problems for themselves. Absolutely. And that's also part of the journey of humanity. We're up against sort of this clock, if you will, that doesn't stop, that's in constant motion. We're playing catch up, trying to remember the past, trying to remember who we are, trying to remember our God self, try to remember and understand our purpose for being here, while at the same time happen to live life in the present moment in time space. You know, you got to eat, you got to drink, you got to wash your ass. You know, you got to feed your children, you got to maintain your life, maintain your household, and then depending on where you are in the world, that changes flavor, that changes look. Depending on where you are geographically, culturally, ethnically located and living and existing in the world. So the idea that we go at the ancestors for the idea of just my own fix, just my own repair, just my own blessing, for just my own well-being, to battle my boss, to battle my enemies, you know, to help me to gain prosperity, without understanding that we are unilaterally pulling from universal energy while at the same time returning universal energy. Just like we breathe. When we exhale, we're pulling in. We're pulling in. When we inhale, we're projecting out that energy back to the universe. It's an even exchange. So we heal often, we start the journey for ourselves to stop our own pain, to stop our own discomfort, to find our own focus, our own clarity. But then at some point, and that some point is not, you know, there's some finite point of healing, and then you walk out into that. Often you are walking out into that all through the healing process. If we use medical terms, you know, there's physical therapy and occupational therapy and other forms of therapy that might be happening even while you're in the hospital, even while you're in ICU, even while you're an outpatient. And so we've given you a prescription, and we've given you an EBO, and we've given you some homework, and now you've got to walk a certain step, eat a certain path or diet, follow and acknowledge particular taboos that are specific to you. So yes, I'm not saying that there's no specific individual place in this. For indeed, we are that spot in the middle of the circle. We are God in this divine moment in time space. But we've got to remember that we are divine, and then we're also human. We're also flesh. We're also clay. You know, because we say I am human, and so there's some sense of morality and integrity and consciousness and ideology, attached with that for being a human, because we separate ourselves from quote unquote animal nature. But we're mammals and indeed exist also in that dimensional space that is animal. Back us into a corner. Let your child be under the threat of danger, and so your animal nature governed by your Godhead, your God self, your God consciousness, and you react. We respond on the instinct. But the idea of prayer and meditation and initiation and ritual and it's about learning to be still, putting things in a particular order, setting up a particular program, a particular map, a particular way of doing so that something is then manifest, duplicated, multiplied, in which is in alignment with what we want, what we wish for, but also what's in our best interest. Some of you have had divination with me, and you've heard me talk about God and destiny from a voodoo perspective, and the idea that God or the goddess or the universe, if you will, meaning a universe that has a higher consciousness, writes destiny, and we sort of have this understanding passed down from culture to culture that it's always in our best interest, but it's not often in a language that we can easily interpret, easily can understand. Destiny, like the goddess, like God speaks in a soft, still voice. So we have to be still to hear it. We have to be quiet to hear it. Somebody in my past used to say, you can't hear with your mouth open. And some of you are talking even when your mouth is closed. You're already judging it. You've already come up with a why or why not. You've already made sense of it before it's even been completely unveiled to you, before it's been completely revealed to you. And that's how we view destiny. Now, ancestors work within the confines of destiny, but ancestors have had that human incarnation, and they're in your blood. They understand good, bad, right, wrong. They understand the challenges you're up against. They understand what you are facing as a human. They know what childbirth is. They know what adolescence is, and they know all what aging is. And so your ancestors will often step in to do the work. God or the goddess writes destiny, but ancestors do the work. And so often when we're up against something, feel challenged by something, feel what we perceive as a negative energy. And I've got to make that clear because every time you hear me say all is a blessing, and many of you now have made that your mantra, all is a blessing, understand you cannot then deny the darkness in that blessing. When I say all is a blessing, I mean that even in the dark time, even in the bad time, even when I can't make sense of something, especially when I can't make sense of something, especially when things are not going my way, especially in the dark and unknown time. Now, what separates the spiritual person from the person who's sort of acting or living spiritually is the awareness that God is absolute. So God sees and perceives the Alpha and the Omega in a way that we cannot in this carnal body. So we often are too quick to judge, too quick to act, too quick to respond, and often based on a pattern that's already set up. I should say a program that's already set up from within us. So if you've been denied something, then you're much quicker to, aggressively hold on to something. If you've been denied a voice or you felt like you haven't been able to speak, then you're much quicker to speak, but not necessarily think and apply your words and apply power and understand the power usage within our words. So often God is right there speaking in a soft, still voice. As we take these steps, as we make the left or the right, as we face the detour, as we face the roadblock. But if we can't be still, and this is not a judgment, because in those moments when you're at the crossroads is when it's hardest to be still. It's when it's hardest to listen. When all this activity is going on, when many people are requiring something of you, your spouse, your children, your co-workers, your employers, your customers, whatever that might be, or it's the weather. You've heard me use in broadcasts as weather. I identify challenges as weather because we can't avoid the dark spots. Just like within our ancestry, you can't avoid them, especially if you have knowledge, especially if light has been shown on them. But our purpose in this moment is to bring balance to truth, bring correction to the best of our ability in this now moment, leaving that vibrational, energetic footprint that absolutely then does benefit those who's gone before and those who will go after. Sort of the idea that we view it in a more selfish kind of way. Well, why should I have to bear the brunt of my ancestors? Well, our enslaved ancestors could have said the same thing. Could have offered that same question. And we have many well documented examples throughout history of people who have sacrificed life, limb, personal pursuit, personal gain for things that are bigger than themselves. And so the idea that you would want to make things better for your children, easier for your children, better for your grandchildren, easier for your grandchildren. And when we do indeed view it from a inheritance perspective, from a carnal, material perspective, it's real easy for us to look at certain individuals and families and communities that have indeed left an inheritance financially, maybe in terms of property ownership and land, maybe in terms of they've been great leaders, great door openers, great innovators, and have laid a foundation now for which their children and maybe even grandchildren can then follow in. And so spiritually, we cannot let sort of the voice of the day, which sort of empowers negative, which sort of empowers aggression, which supports evil, which to some degree supports darkness. We cannot let that voice override what the spiritual person absolutely knows and understands, is that positive is absolute. Positive energy is absolute. It will survive gossip. It will survive drama. It will survive backstabbing. It will survive all manner of evil and dark work. It will survive generational curses. It will survive it all. And so we must operate from our God self. We must not regress sort of into our flesh and into our animal nature and into our lower chakra systems, no matter what the weather. No matter what the weather. And I feel right now in this moment as if I'm speaking to many things. I could be talking about the politics of the day. I could be talking about the weather of the day. I could be talking about what battle you're personally undergoing. I could be talking about my own battle. And that's one of the things I like about the voice of spirit. Because if it's truth, if it's absolute, it sounds like a parable to the foolish, to the uneducated, to the unwise, to the unknowing. But it makes so much clarity and so much sense when your third eye is open, when your head is open. We don't put enough value. We talk about Orisha romance. I talk about Orisha romance. I coined the notion, the idea of what Orisha romance is. Many of you just have agreed with me over the years. But I talk about what we don't know in context of that. And the number one Orisha, the number one concern should be Ori. Should be Ori. So even in the context of that which you choose to want, that which you need, that which you desire, that which destiny and God and goddess and the ancestors would have for you, still must pass through your head, still must pass through your ori. And if your head doesn't allow it, it can't be. We in the Western culture might describe that as will. God can't override or overpower your will. He can present the blessing, He can gift it to you. As we look at that story of the talents, one brother multiplied his talent, one brother did the best of his ability and multiplied, a few of his talents. The brother who buried his talent, who hid his talents, it is said in that scripture, God was most displeased with. So it is the idea of not taking action, not going the next step in what we say we believe, what we say we understand, where we lay our treasures. And so our ancestors are something that cannot be neglected, particularly if we're looking at health challenges. You're talking about both strands of your DNA now, both lineages, both parental powers, and then the sets of grandparents that come with that. It's a genetic code that none of us can override, even if you don't know it, even if you aren't aware of it. There's a great deal of the Old Testament that is just the telling and retelling of generations. The Williams begat the Harrises, and the Harrises begat the Masons, and the Masons begat the Greens, and so on and so forth. So the idea of lineage and ancestral power is not new. It's not confined just to ATR. It's not confined just to Voodoo and Ifa and Lukumi. We all have ancestors. Everyone indeed has ancestors. But we don't all acknowledge and honor those ancestors in the same place, even within singular bloodline. I don't mix my African ancestors up with my Hindu or India-based ancestors or with my indigenous American ancestors. I allow them space. Now we evolved sacred space with minority, modernness, our development of modern Western culture. And so what once was outside and was built from clay and was housed in nature is now housed indoors or housed in a temple or housed in a shrine. And so sometimes we condense things. I like the Cuban Lucomi approach to how they house Orisha sometimes, particularly, let's say, 50 years and then back. If you look at the book Ishu Arts in America, you'll see some pictures there of Eshu shrines and altars, some going back into the 50s. I think they do have some pictures of some even in the 40s and the 30s in that particular book. And you see sort of this cabinet system with deities sort of housed in level. Of course, with Obatala and higher deities at the top, and deities that deal in earth and nature closer to the ground. So it does speak to our mobility in between the physical world and the spirit world, our animal nature and our human nature and our divine nature. And we indeed, as Einstein has demonstrated through string theory, we live and exist in multiple realms of consciousness, multiple realms of universe, multiple realms of dimensional space, each and every moment of our waking lives, of our conscious lives. And so must operate in balance. We must be in balance. You're not asked to praise ancestors that you have a negative relationship with. You're not asked to call the names of family members who've aggrieved you, who've done harm, who've committed crimes against individuals or the family or humanity. We do pour libation on the ground to keep them still, to keep them quiet, to keep them at rest. Uh, some would say to give them some sense of peace, but I think from a voodoo context, it's more to keep that negative energy from affecting us now on this side. Because as some people say, while you're wailing and you're crying, and we're emotional at funerals, and indeed we should be. There's a historic context to that. Others also say that, be joyful, be happy that people are now free from their physical bondage, now free from some of the binding, heavy, negative energy that we all collect in our lives and with our lives. I don't think that the aged lean just because of osteoporosis or just because of, biological ailment. I think it's also symbolic of the weight that we carry, holding and carrying people's secrets, holding and carrying people's offenses, holding and carrying our own stuff that is not purged, that is not cleansed, that is not, released. And one of the scariest things that I've ever heard in pop culture throughout the decades is, the idea of taking something to the grave. Well, she'll take that to the grave. I'll keep your secret and take that, to the grave. And there's a relative truth to that, where things are taken to the grave and we never have an answer for. We never appear to find an understanding to until some technology is developed or some new forensic way of identifying something is developed. We have no idea the technology that lies ahead of us moving forward in the future to not only pull from DNA, but then to pull from that acoustic record, to be able to finally attach technology to the nervous system of humanity, and then our brains and our consciousness indeed begin to operate then like a computer, better than your iPhone, your iPad, your desktop, whatever your device of choice that you might be using today. So we bring balance because of, first, ourselves. Because we seek balance, we seek truth, we seek clarity, so that we can have and evolve the best lives possible. But then we absolutely want to create and recreate a world around us that is in our image. And even if you're not conscious of that, even if you choose to say, well, I'm not here, I think it was Charles Barkley that once upon a time said that back in the 80s or the 90s, I believe it was, that he wasn't here to be a role model, he was just an athlete. He probably has a different opinion of that today, but that's an idea that some people also have spiritually, that indeed I'm going to go into the spirit realm for my own need, my own pain, my own gratification, my own usage, without any consciousness that we leave a residual energy that then affects all of us, even if no one is aware of it, even if no one sees you doing it. Indeed, the darkness that you work in your dark spaces, in your experimental delving into witchcraft and dark magic, does not just affect you. It affects the planet in its entirety. A real world example of that might be how we view terrorism. And terrorism is just a terrifying word. What is it really? Who is it really? What does it look like really? Those are all relative truth. Does it look like you? Does it look like me? Does it wear a head wrapping? Does it wear a cowboy hat? What does a terrorist look like? It's an idea that we have and that we've absorbed in society and that we sort of put our own meanings and fears and apprehensions onto. And even when the crime is committed, we then have to look at the pattern, the communication, all these other outside extenuating factors before we then say it's a terrorist activity or it's a terrorist plot. But the idea of what we don't know can't hurt us. Is that a relative truth if we're talking about terrorism? If we're talking about acts of violence, if we're talking about mass shootings, if we're talking about people projecting energy, evil, or onto others at random points in our society. So if we package things in a physical sense, we tend to have one way of looking at it, of viewing it. And then when we package things in a spiritual sense, we then tend to have another way of looking at it. And somehow that is not as important at the pop cultural level of things as the before mentioned pattern. And that's because we invest in what's physical, what we can see, what we can eat, what we can drink, what we can buy, the material value that we place, often neglecting how we feel, how the next person feels, the energy that we set up at any given point in time, space, and then how that then affects future events that take place in our culture, in our society. And often the event happens and then we're tracing back and trying to make sense of and trying to understand, as opposed to trying to cut off some of these things at the beginning, at the root. Teenage violence, child pregnancy, unemployment, things that we know have an absolute presence in our world, in our culture. But on a relative dimensional space, it's only as important as how it affects you at any given moment in time space. And the truly spiritual person does not have that option. Does not have that option. And let's be clear, everyone's not called to be a minister, a preacher, a teacher, a healer, a seer, a reader, a Wiccan. Everyone's not called to be a voodoo priest, a Nobia. Everyone's not called. And we know the saying, many are called, to few are chosen. But I think that should read more like many will call themselves, but few will absolutely be chosen by the spirit realm to act. I'm not talking about by society. I'm not talking about by man. I'm not talking about by groups and powers and organizations. I'm talking about by the spirit realm, by the ancestors, by that which is in the realm of destiny that we can't box with. That is indeed who writes destiny. If many of us were operating indeed on just our own wherewithal, man, we wouldn't be here. I've seen a lot of capital writing. So help me out, Keone. Am I missing my questions? Please type your questions in all capital letters. This will help me to sort of sort out the questions from the comments and other general conversation that's going on. Also, be mindful that the phone lines are open at area code 845-277-9143. Greetings to my Blog Talk Radio audience in chat as well. Please type your questions and comments in all capital letters so that I can see them in the chat. Otherwise, you can call area code 845-277-9143. I'll be more than happy to unmute your mic and bring you into this conversation. As I always ask on every show, please do alert me of any technical glitches, buffering, audio issues. I am using two separate browsers correctly today. So my YouTube is in one browser and my Blog Talk Radio is in another. And I believe I may have eliminated a great deal of the YouTube buffering issue that we were experiencing before. So if you're in either platform, just let me know what's happening, let me know what it's looked like, and give me an opportunity to correct it if it indeed it can be corrected. I also want to bring up a blog post that I posted um, about 15 hours ago, 16 hours ago. Some of you may be aware of it. Um, and again, it goes back to sort of our whole Arisha romance thing, our black girl magic, our black boy magic, our witches and black witches and all sorts of magical practitioners. If you trust Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and sort of the idea that that is not ancient, that is not indigenous, and we sort of borrowed a witch culture that is created in Western pop cultural minds, movies, imagination, books, novels, our own personal feelings of lack of empowerment, and then creating sort of cosplay like supernatural powers and hooking them onto these traditions and then acting that out. And then the next group that is somehow confused by that and then can't separate real voodoo from sort of this cosplay that's going on. So I posted the story that's in the news in Nigeria right now from December 1st. Two young girls accused of witchcraft set ablaze, set afire. Two victims, said to be aged 11 and 5 years old respectively, are reportedly battling for their lives at the Plateau State Specialist Hospital at Jos. The state chairperson of Nigeria Association of Women Journalists, acronyms NAWOJ, Mrs. Jennifer Yarima, described the act as a gross violation of the human rights of the victims and called for a concerted effort from law enforcement agencies to ensure for the perpetrators to be brought to justice and arrested and persecuted. And I may have gotten about a dozen people who, responded, with a sad face or the angry face or left, a condolence, on the post. But it's not trending. It's not popular. Many people aren't looking at it. And I find that very telling to the whole idea of how we in the West view spirituality and view what spiritual is. And indeed view what being a practitioner of an indigenous system like voodoo or Ifa or Khan or being a Sangoma and versus how a witch and the idea and the concept of which is looked at and applied, and not just in Africa, but in other parts of the indigenous world. We see some of these same stories in India. And if I'm not mistaken, the largest body of Africans outside the continent of Africa is in the country of India. That's why you see so many dark-skinned people in India. And you do see the witch stories, the witch burnings, the lynching of women, the lynching of children and old people under the guise of some of these traditions. It's also something that we must know, the interference of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Western view sets of what God and the devil are, what witchcraft is. And so many people believe that, sort of these lynch mobs on witches are being entirely fueled by evangelical presence in some of these parts of the world. And to some degree, that is absolutely correct in terms of giving fuel to something that would already exist. Just like I say, voodoo existed in Louisiana long before the Haitian Revolution. It came with the first enslaved Africans that debarked the first ship to arrive here from Ouida, Benin. And so this idea of witch being a threat to the crops, to the people, to the village is something that's of an indigenous nature in many parts of the world, and does have some root in a time that predates, sort of our modern understanding of this conflict between religion and spirituality, between witchcraft and magic and supernatural healing and faith healing, and all the various divisions now that we label and title these occurrences that are primarily carved out of politics. We use certain words, certain languages, depending on who we're talking to, where we're saying it, who we're trying to get to hear us, versus, often the real truth of what's being said in a sort of a fact matter-based presentation. So when we say witch, Black witch, we're often talking to people of color who are part of a pop cultural phenomenon of reviving sort of this interest in ATR and indigenous cultural traditions. The implementation of real paganism and witchcraft and other practices is an extension of our freedom and our liberty to put whatever we want on social media, and then for people to misinterpret that or not know how to interpret that, or not even be educated in that, to then reapply that in a way that's often out of context with its original meaning. So even when we think about ancestors, the Western mind immediately goes to the dead. And sure, in a relative sense, we're talking about the dead, the most recent dead, the ancient dead, the dead that we favor, the dead that you know, but also those who've gone on that you don't know, that absolutely share a space with you in the spirit realm. We look at it as a basket, as a textile, as a piece of cloth. We are each weaving a thread, a piece of cloth, a straw, if you will, in this basket, in this textile that is not just humanity, but is also, as we continue to evolve, more cosmic, more universal. It's more than just me. It's more than just my water. It's more than just my dirt and my trees. It's more than just my energy. It's more than just my feeling. And so you can choose, I can choose to be negative. I can choose to be vengeful. I can choose to be angry. I can choose to be unhappy. I can choose to be disgruntled. And so we might say, well, then that's my choosing, and that only affects me. But that's not the reality. And so you might not have children. You might not be married. You might live alone. But you still project that energy. You still got to work. You still got to shop. You still have to go outside your door. But let's say you don't. Let's say you're the monk. You're the nun. You're tucked away in Tibet. You're tucked away in Ile Ife. And you haven't left for a year. And so you're in prayer. You're in ritual. You're in consecration all day and all night. We feel and we embrace and we accept that energy. That energy feeds the planet. It's why we say that we do it. It's why we believe that this activity is done. When we burn the 2-week candle or the 7-day candle, we do so in order to fuel a prayer, to fuel a ritual, to keep light, to keep activity, to keep energy alive and moving. We believe that the prayer accompanying the candle is extended as the wax, which is another form. Which is another form of energy is expanded, and then that energy is released into the air. You know, it might be soot, it might be smoke, it might be vapor that we don't see, but that energy is then released. So understand that your energy is palpable, it's tangible, it's real, not just for you, but for others, and vice versa, not just for others, while you're projecting your revenge and your hate and your payback and all that kind of stuff that is then returned unto you, particularly if your hands are not clean. You can't operate in that dark realm if your hands are not clean. So I'm going to assume by the, thank you, Kiona, by the large question marks that I have questions that I'm not seeing. And I actually like that, by the way. I like the large question marks. That absolutely helps me to see and respond to the questions. So I'm going to assume, and if I'm wrong, help me out. The first question, Kiona, aren't you God now? Absolutely. Absolutely. You are God. You are goddess right now in this most present moment in time space. And for people who are so overtly uh, religious, anti-religious, and opposed to religion, and even the words that sound like religion, I say universe, because indeed we are made up of not just clay and the minerals and the atoms and the molecules and the nutrients of this plane, but also all the things that come from the sky, stardust and nanodiamonds and all the mineral and even the water viewed as a mineral has arrived here from outer space, has arrived here from somewhere else. So indeed, we are God. We are the universe. We are creation right now, right here in this moment in time space. And many of you have seen the photographs or the paintings or the drawings, you know, usually someone in the lotus or someone in a spiritual position. And then the consciousness is depicted as the galaxy or the Milky Way or the spinning of the universe. And so when we say, which is a scientific word, a quantum metaphysical word, uh, macrocosm mirrors the microcosm. We are saying that our small world mirrors our big world. If you look at it in the right proportions, our DNA structure mirrors something much smaller. Atoms, molecules, how they move around, electromagnetism, and all that kind of stuff. But then at a bigger level, we see the same thing happening with planets, stars. So we are God. We are, in a sense, God in the center of a universe, and we create our reality with our mouths, with our thought processes, what we believe, what we feed, and then what we feel. Because a part of our belief and our knowing is not just brain, it's not just third eye, but also heart. And the challenge of the human is to balance that the challenge of God, Kiona, in a physical body is to balance that against natural law, against physical law. Because if we could break natural law, if we could break physical law randomly and at will, gravity wouldn't make any sense. And so nothing would be held together. Many of our earth laws wouldn't make any sense. If we shapeshift at just a thought, but we had absolutely no control over that. And then everything in life becomes random. And there's a shape shift, a transformation shifting. Then how much sense will we be able to make in this reality, and particularly to choose a goal, choose a target, to come up with an idea, to come up with a plan, and then to move that thing forward. But the truth is, That picture I just painted is absolutely what's happening. At least, according to string theory, at least 11 different realities are happening right now in this moment in time space. Except in one reality, that suit is purple or zebra paint or completely made out of stone or it's not there at all or it's upside down in another plane or I am not even human or I'm part something else. All of the anything that you can envision. This is science, people. This is science. Anything you can imagine about this reality right now is already real in another plane dimension. So therefore, we are God. We are goddess. We do exist in the center at the crossroads at the plane of existence, but we are happen to balance divine law with earth law. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge. And people like me try to make it sound easier said than done. We might demonstrate it as easier said than done, which is why early in the show I reminded you I am human. I am divine, I am voodoo, but I am also human, just like each and every one of you. Because I don't show my pain, reflect my tragedy, show my imperfections right out on the surface, doesn't mean that they aren't there. It doesn't mean that any person that you might view as somehow having it together or following some kind of economic plan that you would envy or a spirit plan that you would want to possess, doesn't mean we're not challenged. I could do a whole 4 hour show on just my challenges, but would you be here for that? Would you find that edifying and entertaining? I share from my experience of resolution, result oriented practitioner. I am result oriented. So I speak from what I've already tried, what others around me have tried, what has been traditionally shown to work, what my client body and my godchildren has shown to work. And over time, that becomes the thing to do. Somehow, sage became the thing to do. I'm not sure where that exactly came from, except from the idea that we use many herbs for cleansing, for purification, for ritual ceremony. So I appreciate that, Kiona, and help me out with any other questions that I might not be seeing right away. I also am grateful for you interjecting the website, www.houseofthedivineprince.com in the chat. And please, I invite you to submit your questions, comments, and requests, your private questions, comments, and requests by way of email at DivinePrince at houseofthedivineprince.com. I absolutely agree, Kiona, about wait a minute, I didn't see the question about ancestors and tarot readers. Let's go back. How to connect with ancestors with tarot readers. Oh, Flower of Life. My apologies. Greeting, Flower of Life. You can only, because of what tarot is as a tool, and it is not quite as ethnic specific, though we know that at its historic nature, I believe it was the Italians who sort of gifted us tarot as we know it today. They didn't gift us many of the symbols that are included in traditional tarot, but we know that they've gifted us that. But it is paper. It is not quite from an organized system, if you will. So I only use tarot in connection with ancestors, only in regards as to how they show up to do the work. And I associate that with the number 4. I associate destiny with the number 10. Think about it. The number one could be you or it could be God. The zero could be God. And it could also be symbolic of the binary code, the very first 0 and 1, God birthing out the first pulse, first human, and then that multiply. So the 10 is my God number, is my destiny number. And we don't write destiny. We believe destiny is always in our best interest. It's always to our advantage. Though like God, flower of life, we can't always see it, hear it, perceive it, requiring us to be still, requiring us to hear, requiring us to listen, requiring us to focus, requiring us to do all these things, fasting. But your ancestors are more aggressive because they've had a human incarnation. So your number 4 in the divine numerology that I was taught, and this divine numerology goes all the way back to many Masonic sects, ancient Egyptian understanding of numbers. The number 4 is not only representative of your ancestors, but angelic forces getting involved in your business. Angelic forces move at 180-degree angles. 190-degree angles, which explains why many of your religious temples and rules sort of have this slant thing going on. And so they sort of move like this. And when we look at that in math, cubes, boxes, rectangles, moving from that one plane of existence and then jumping to that other, that's embedded in the number 4. The number 4 also holds your primal elements: earth, water, fire, air, which inhabit what we call our physical universe. But when we look at it, earth, water, fire, air, and then mind or ether or spirit realm, without the spirit realm, without that interdimensional space that we just talked about, none of this could actually be held together. None of this would hold. So ancestors will show up through your number 4s, through the patterns that surround the number 4. It will often explain why the ancestors are showing up, what they're trying to influence, what they're getting involved in. And like destiny, we can't block or stop or inhibit ancestral involvement. We can try. That shows up as blockages, complications, unnecessary loss of money, time, energy, stress, because ultimately God, destiny, and your ancestors get their way. We can delay it, slow it down by not going with the flow, doing the work, acknowledging the work, etc. But we can't overpower our ancestors to some degree any more than we can God, without stepping in truly as gods and getting involved in the creation and recreation of our own destiny. So the diabetes that passes down generationally in your family, some might say is something that is generational, that's DNA, that's hard to stop or block. But if we eat the right things, exercise, change how we live and how we operate, we then can bring some balance with the aid of the ancestors. Please, I'm going to have to take a momentary break. I will be forward in a moment. I'm going to put on a little music. I'll be right back. All is Okay, I'm back, y'all. All right, y'all. Please forget questions. Kiana, please help me out. Try to get me back on track here. Okay, Kiona's talking about there being a respect, a protocol, a manner, a language, a tone that must be used to approach African spirituality. And that's absolutely true, not just of African spirituality, but I would say of any world culture and tradition. Hindus could be righteously indignant. Africans can be righteously indignant. Indigenous Americans can be righteously indignant. Those that would even stand up for the Celts and the Welsh and European bloodlines and ethnic groups could absolutely stand up and be indignant about how we appropriate and borrow and steal from and manipulate these world practices and traditions in a way that never existed before now. Understand, we didn't have, internet, we didn't have access to such a wealth of global languages and traditions and practices, much in the way that we do today. That didn't exist before. So what we are seeing, what we are experiencing is new, is monumental, is groundbreaking in terms of this experiment, if you will, that is the World Wide Web, and how we now have access to all of this information, and then how we use it, how we apply it. For some, this is just entertainment. It's just another tool in your toolbox, or it's just another toy in your toy box. But for others, this is office equipment. Remember when a computer was office equipment? Remember when a beeper and a cell phone was for business people doing business? And now it's in every home. Now it's an extension of your watch, of your TV, of your game console. So there are many implications to this information. Natural heaven, am I missing something? Is there another question I've skipped here in the chat? Please type your questions in all capital letters. This does allow me to see and respond in a way. Kiona, you're typing almost everything you say in capitals, and that's confusing me. So I need you to sort of limit that. Yeah, so I guess that was the last question, connecting to ancestors uh, using tarot through that symbolism. If I wanted to go deeper, I'm then going to use the tools of that culture, of those people, to get a much clearer connection in terms of divination from spirit. I don't rely entirely on tarot in terms of communication with ancestors, particularly in voodoo. We just don't quite do it that way. And often divination is divided in Ifa, voodoo, many of those West African traditions, between that we do with the ancestors versus that which we do with the spirits and the spirit realm. and the deities. If there are another question or comment, hit me with it. Otherwise, I'm going to be ending the broadcast momentarily. I have some things to do before the year is out. I did want to say more about the girls being burned in Africa. Just the idea, how we play around with the voodoo, how we play around with the idea and the concept of voodoo dolls and what they are and how they work and how everybody's doing it now. Suggests that it's either not very real or it's something that's only as real as you believe it to be, or it's something that we can all sort of safely apply and manipulate and go in and out of. And indeed, if that were the case, we'd be living in a very magical world. If that was indeed the case. So we all got to do our work to pierce beyond the veil, to transcend just the profane and the regular vibration and note and tones that many of us live on and operate from in a daily basis. The idea of spirituality and religion and being spiritual and feeding spirits and acknowledging ancestors has universally, historically, been something that has been relegated to the realm of sacred space. And so we have now brought it into our everyday lives in a Western context. And we are finding the challenge of bringing balance, living in this world, in this time, but also bringing this power, this great force, anew, and in many ways anew, into the modern context in a way that's usable, plausible, realistic, practical, result oriented in this most present moment in time space. I certainly do appreciate each and every one of you for being present here and now in this most important time space with me for another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. I will be ending the show soon. And I certainly do appreciate you. I am going to attempt to continue to broadcast right up through the end of the week, uh, provided nothing gets in the way of my schedule or your our coming together in this sacred circle of gods and goddesses. I certainly do appreciate your time, your energy, your support. I look forward to feeding you, serving you another year going into 2020. Please do enjoy your holidays. I'll be working right through the holidays and know that I am here you and for you and that all is truly and indeed a blessing. Keon, am I missing a question? Otherwise, I'm going to keep it moving. Natural Heaven, the screen is moving all during the course of the show. So to prevent long periods of silence, I have to then scroll back to see your question, but I don't see a question from you other than the one that I believe that I had already responded to. I'm just not seeing it. And I just don't want to tie up 5 minutes of dead airspace just trying to make sense of it. The last question or comment that I saw was, how do I connect to ancestors during a tarot reading? I don't see. Okay, I see. How do I connect with the ancestors? Okay. How do I connect with the ancestors? Again, that is contingent on your tradition, on your path, on your ethnic group, and the system that's being utilized and applied. In my house, we require DNA information. we require, and it's traditional to do a official fa divination. And those things in my house are combined in order to address who, what, where, and how we acknowledge our ancestors. It's more than creating a space. It's more than pouring a libation. It's more than just feeding our ancestors at any given space and time. It's something that I teach in ancestral divination and work. It's something that is a part of many traditional initiatory processes like Ifa, Voodoo, Akan, Ebe, Palo, Kandable. All of these traditions have a system of addressing the ancestors, communicating with the ancestors, built within those systems. I've taught on it, shared it. I believe this is my 11th year, beloved, in Blog Talk Radio platform, and I've been on YouTube as just as long, but I've only started doing these type of broadcasts in the last year. So it is almost like explaining chemistry, um, which would be hard to do in a limited amount of time without knowing who your ancestors are, where you come from, what that balance is, if you will, in your ancestors, and then applying that to your shrine. We all acknowledge God. We all acknowledge Goddess. We all acknowledge ancestors in a very general and generic way. And for every identity and person and human breathing in the sound of my voice, there's a podcast or a blog or some expert that believes they have the understanding or the system or the appropriate way in which you acknowledge ancestors. And I'm here to just represent and acknowledge and clarify what is voodoo and those traditions that are under the umbrella of voodoo. If there was another question, I'm still not seeing it. And even as I scroll up, it still keeps scrolling down. Yes, I hope I was able to answer your questions and your comments that did come through in a clear and concise way. People want to know why I don't talk about sacrifices, animals, the mixing of potions and lotions and, and herbs and product when I do these broadcasts. And there's several reasons for it, very clear reasons. One is that's my product. That's what I do. Okay. And so what would I have to give? What would I have to offer a client if I've given all my sources away? I also offer it in documentaries and archaeological programming and academic programming where it can be accurately and legally and properly documented for dexterity, not just for now and in this moment in podcast time space, but for forever in some cases, so that it is a part of a historically accurate, academically accurate archive of what voodoo, hoodoo, root work, and conjure is. And then the third reason, beloved, is the most important. You'd hurt yourselves. You'd hurt yourselves. It's already been demonstrated in my experience more than once, in more than one ceremony. People would hurt themselves. People seek what they want, and they want it right now. And in any opportunity to take a shortcut to that, to mix up something that's going to, me and my mother and a couple of other older people had this discussion the other day. about why people believe God doesn't perform miracles the way they are presented at the Bible, if indeed those miracles are real and not explainable, and also why we don't see fairies and unicorns and magical events, and indeed people using these grimoires and these magical books and these magical texts to indeed create powerful magic. And my argument is that absolutely we still see and manifest miracles. Absolutely people are able to cross over into the spirit realm every single day. We do, however, live in a different time and space relative to consciousness. Our heads are different. We are more godlike now than 200 years ago. Just think of all the gadgets, like the cigarette lighter that we take for granted, created in just the last 200 years, that would, in an old world mindset, be godlike, be magical. The cell phone would be unimaginable 500 years ago. People would say that that was a magic box for communication. So I believe that the power, the knowledge, the ability absolutely exists, and it's in our hands. It's divinely innate. It is inherent. But I also believe that as we evolve as a human species, as individuals, but then as a human species, we are then being given access to greater levels of information, much of which could harm us and ourselves. But then they are masked behind, applied to modern technology. So our bombs and our defense systems, our microwaves and our computers and TVs and our cars and how we power our homes continues to evolve, continues to grow, and mask a certain level of heightened awareness that is not common at the grassroots level of population. Most of us have no idea what's going on, in this cell phone. What pieces, what parts, what chemistry, and then there's a degree of it that's, minuscule in terms of size. So if you don't have the right equipment and the right technology, we can't even envision that. Yet it's something that we take for granted. It's something that we drop and crack and damage and throw away and renew and ultimately ends up probably at the bottom of our oceans and in some deep hole in the bottom of the ground somewhere. So I believe God has and still does gift that power. People still do have the gift of prophecy. Some of these gadgets and toys, I believe, are an extension of that gift of prophecy. Many of our great prophets and storytellers have masked their truths behind sonnets and poetic language and hip hop jargon and cute ways of saying things. And I always say for two reasons. One, to confound the foolish and the wicked, those who would use it for negative, but also to protect it, to maintain its sanctity, to maintain its righteous nature. So I'm going to move forward. Greetings, Moontide. Greetings. I certainly do appreciate each and every one of you. We are 15 minutes before the top of the hour. Please, if you have questions, comments, and requests, do type them in all capital letters in the chat, like Really T has done in Blog Talk Radio, and I'll be more than happy to respond to you. Greetings to you as well, my beloved. I'm trying to fish out your question or comment. I am aware of the links that are being made between Israelites the Israelite tribes, and various people of the world. Um, I have to say, I don't necessarily agree with it. It requires me having to accept a certain legitimacy about the Bible that I have evolved from. I don't proselytize, if you understand. I don't preach. I'm not here to convert people to voodoo. My platform is voodoo. Who I am is voodoo. My lifestyle is voodoo. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I don't have much of a social life. I don't do much of anything outside of voodoo and art, entertainment, and performance, cultural performance. So that's my platform. I don't feel a need to um, wave any particular cultural banner or religious banner or rainbow flag banner or any of those things. Not that they're not important, not that I'm not somehow part of many communities, diverse communities. But the Bible has always been controversial for me from the beginning, beloved. First, as a former spiritualist, black spiritualist church member, then as a former Baptist, Southern Baptist, then as a former evangelical Christian, then as a former Rastafarian, then as a former practitioner who became well acquainted with Dr. York, the Hebrew Israelite movement, many of those movements that have their root in the 1960s, the decade in which I was born with, and then sort of grew and developed into the 70s. And many were sort of gone by the 80s and are now only being seen in books or being revived, if you will, on the internet. I don't and no longer support the Bible as blackface. So we can blacken up the Bible. And indeed, the Bible is black. Indeed, the stories that are being told, the histories that are being pulled from, the ones that originate in the books that predate the Council of Nicaea, that predate King James, that predate modern duplication, retranslation, etc. So we're looking at the lost books of the Bible. We're looking at they got a special name for that set of books found by the Egyptian farmer boy. We've got to really go back when we start talking about the Bible and the book and who are we following. I also have to consider the DNA. And there have been DNA research done to tie Israelites, Ethiopians, and then what was racially called the Hottentot, which was a white supremacist terminology for the Hutu, the Mbuti, many of these ethnic groups connected to what the tragedy in Rwanda, and they found a footprint for the Israelites, not necessarily mirroring the pattern that the Bible puts out, but sort of showing a root to those people, and quite possibly those people having traveled deeper into South Africa historically, long before that period that we associate the Israelites with. Just like when people, when we were going through the Kemetic thing, free Dr. York, save Dr. York thing. And I challenged many people then to produce Egyptian DNA. Now, surprisingly, we've now found out that many African Americans produce this Egyptian Ramses III DNA. So I had to change my language. I stood corrected. I had to ask for forgiveness as I evolved my knowledge. So I'm still, beloved, having a problem with the whole Hebrew Israelite thing, sort of blacking up the Bible. And I felt the same way about Rastafari to some degree. Um, that we're now sort of using the very tool that was used against us, but giving it black characters, black faces, black stories, black personas to then move forward and do what with it exactly. And we're also not finding that those particular tribes to be all that inclusive when it comes to black people. Um, Other black people that think like them and look like them and dress like them and eat like them and sort of travel in the same circle, in the same mindset as them. But it does not mirror organically the idea of tribe or tribal nations or ethnic groups and families as we saw them in the motherland, the mother continent, through its evolution. Some of you have done the 23andMe, and it shows you a vertical timeline back as far as they can in terms of DNA to the beginning of time, and then walk it forward in terms of your specific bloodline. So, where were your ancestors 5,000 years ago versus 2,000 years ago versus 500 years ago, etc. And I find my bloodline originated in Asia. So to some degree, indeed, we are Asiatic uh, in, in that in that frame of language. But we often use language that's political in today's modern discussions about these religions and these traditions. I'm seeing, okay, Kiona, I see your comment, 2 questions pending, um, but I'm not seeing either question. If you can copy and paste it for me, that would be good. I see they didn't appear in chat. I see, okay, maybe it's my laptop. I see, okay, there are no questions pending right now. But then at the bottom of the chat, I see have 2 questions pending. In neither book do neither question do I see. I don't see either question. Okay, now I see Moontide. What are your views on hearing voices? Okay, so I'm gonna say that's 1 question. And what was the second question? Uh, Hearing voices. I'll come back to that. Um, okay, I get bothered. Is that giving them misplaced energy? By your getting bothered by them? Okay, let me be sure I'm understanding the question. First, you're asking me what is my take on hearing voices? And then, almost as if a response to your own question, um, I'm reading in any way I get bothered. Is that giving them misplaced energy? The first question is the hearing of voices. The hearing of voices is always a sensitive subject matter, and particularly in today's modern context. We don't live in Haiti with trance voodoo possession as a normal part of everyday culture. We don't live in the time of the Temple of Delphi and Mesopotamia and the idea of government hired oracles. We live in a modern time of pharmaceuticals and drug companies and industries that control our food and our education and our health and our overall sense of well-being. And provided we look at that moon tide as something that's in association with the Ori, which is a Yoruba word for your head or your God consciousness, we have to first be clear that mental health is not at work. Are the voices rational? What are the voices saying? That might be a checklist. In fact, let's reorder that list. Number one, where are you from? Who are you? Is it of God? Is it of the devil? That has to be clarified. All magical books talk about testing the spirit, being clear about the spirit, hearing voices in many ways. It's not very different. I have the hiccups. It's not very different than tarot card reading or crystal ball reading or any other form of divination. Even the Ouija board, there still has to be clarified the source of the message, the purpose of the message, and then what are you supposed to do with it? We are never given real, authentic visions, clarity about people's past, present, and future, and even these communications without a purpose. So if you're being communicated with and there's no purpose, then it might be mental health, or you're now talking about a jinn, a disembodied spirit, a ghost, even a demon, many other spirit forms, spirit energies have to be addressed at the same time in order to be clear about what it is that you're hearing. Now, once that's established, is it of God? Is it of devil? Is it an angel? Is it a jinn? And then what's being said, the value of what's being said, then you can apply that. Now, the notion of you being bothered, if one gets bothered, oh my goodness, the chat keeps moving every time I try to read a question. Oh, you stated in any way I get bothered. Is that giving them misplaced energy? You're being bothered by it, annoyed by it, could speak to other things. It could speak to ghosts, ancestors, jinn, who would otherwise respond to human emotion, human energy. But that then doesn't make them displaced. They're already either coming with a purpose or they're already displaced. But you're being bothered by it. There are psychics who can't turn it off. I'm one of those people who can't turn it off. I can't say I'm bothered by it. I'm more likely to be annoyed if I'm hearing them, if they won't stop, but I'm trying to really focus in on something in real world time. I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody about something else, about something completely unrelated. Sometimes people will come to me in a reading, for instance, and will conceal things that are extremely important, but for whatever reason, they don't feel it's important to talk about or discuss in that moment. And so I'm hearing that, and I might be a little bit more tense or a little bit more serious or a little bit more agitated by the exchange, but my agitation doesn't feed them, doesn't fuel them unless it's something unhealthy, unless it's something that feeds off of of that sort of energy. Okay, your next question, I believe, is if one gets bothered, will that give misplaced energy with the ancestor altar? Do you mean if one feels bothered by the ancestors, and you're working with your ancestral shrine? Yeah, that can be problematic, but that's problematic for anyone. The person who dreams of grandma or grandpa, but can't make sense of it. It might be, you're only using the word bothered by it, so we all have our understanding of what that means. But might not want that communication or might be irritated by the communication. That can create imbalance if your job, your call is griot for your family. If you are the conduit by which the ancestors come through, and let's be clear, you're sort of forcing me to make a choice about what the voices are. If the voices are ancestors and they're trying to get through a message, but you're bothered by that, or you can't sit still for it, or you're not in a place where you're ready to hear and or receive that, that can create problematic energy in the family, at the Christmas table, in your other relationships, etc. Provided that is what we're looking at. Kiona, you are saying she's asking if who is bothered by the dolls on her ancestral altar. I'm really not understanding the question. You have dolls on your ancestor altar. So do I. Now I can't determine if a doll on the ancestors is disturbed or not that I haven't read. Um, so you're kind of asking me to make some assumptions, natural heaven, about what's happening to you that I couldn't make without a appropriate reading. You say that you're bothered when they are bothered, when they are disturbed. Now, when you say disturbed, you mean moved around, when people move items on your shrine? I'm not quite getting it. I'm not quite getting it. I'm not quite getting it. That's not making sense to me. Okay, so who would be moving your dolls around? That's what needs to be questioned. And so you're suggesting they move on their own, the dolls on your shrine. Now be careful how you answer, because my next comment is, where's the videotape? Okay, if you incidentally move them, you find that it disturbs your energy. Now that can be, yes. Now that makes sense to me. I've tried to describe, I think in yesterday's show and in previous shows, that your ancestral shrine is really not random. Um, it's almost like there's a story. I'm not sure where it originates. I want to say it's about a guy who believes that he needs all these pieces and parts and tape and glue and gum and spinning wheels, and he sort of creates this machine in his apartment. And people hear hammering and banging at all hours of the day and night, and they see him carting in, old sewing machines and old laptops and old lawnmowers and pieces of broken equipment in and out of his apartment. And they don't know why. And people complain and they send the police. And finally, someone breaks in and realizes that this man is holding the world together by all these parts and these pieces. And if one piece is out of place, the world could come apart. The world could fall down. And there's stories that mimic this throughout the globe in many ethnic groups and many cultures and in many traditions. So when you are setting up any shrine work, but particularly your ancestral shrine, there is a particular order to how this must be done. And someone else asked about how to serve the ancestors. Moontide, I believe it was. And I said that it's very specific to who your ancestors are, what your ethnic blend is, or your ethnic makeup is, or your ethnic history is as it relates to your family. And then, of course, the footprint that has been made generationally by the strongest energies in your family. And that's not always the most religious. It could be the person without religion. But the strongest energy, and that's from a spiritual context, understanding that spirit is not necessarily contingent to religion. So your negative spirits in your family can set up just as strongly as the positive ones can. And so we don't mix them up on the shrine. We don't serve them all together. There's a particular pattern that's in your mind when you're setting up the altar, and your shrine pieces sort of match that. Sometimes, beloved, you natural heaven, you come across that on your own, which apparently you have done. You just aren't aware of it. You're not suggesting that, and I could be wrong. You're suggesting sort of the response that, I inadvertently move something and then I sort of get this disturbed energy. So I don't know if you already know what this pattern is that you're setting up, or if it's random. It's more organic to have a very specific way of being. But each time you dust your shrine, feed your shrine, clean up your shrine pieces, you reorganize that universe. And in between those periods of cleaning, touching, care for, feeding, once a week maybe, every other week maybe, I'm going to clean all the dishes, all the cups. Or I may clean just some that are not being used while the others are still being utilized. And then the next week go back and sort of rotate that process. But over time, there's an order, there's a structure that's set up in your shrine that you become aware of because it's in your journal. I say every show, journal, write a journal, keep a journal. Even in the entertainment idea of what the witch is and the grimoires and the black books, even Charmed, they had this book. You've got to keep detailed notes like a scientist would, like a chef would, until you know what these recipes are, what these mixes are, what these combinations are. You might even document that movement. I moved this piece, that piece, natural heaven, and I felt a certain kind of way about it. And then in 24-hour period, 4-day period, within a moon cycle, I observed this activity, this result, that result. Greetings, Marcus. I certainly appreciate your being here always. And anyone else who I didn't acknowledge coming in and out of the group, I certainly do appreciate you both here in my video chat, and those who are just sitting on my Blog Talk Radio phone line who have not pressed the number 1 to be invited into the conversation. It is 2 minutes after 10, so if you haven't already dialed, you cannot now dial into my Blog Talk Radio. That's already a done deal until the next show. You can, however, type your questions or comments in all capital letters. And if you are already present on the Blog Talk Radio phone line, press the number 1. I will open your mic and bring you into the conversation. I think I said about 20 minutes ago, I was on my way out here. So I want to be sure I'm not missing anybody's questions, comments, or requests. Please understand this is the busiest time of year. Not only the veils are thinnest, it's the busiest time of year. People want clarity, people want readings, people have emergencies, all kind of crazy stuff falls off in the family. People are facing legal challenges, acts of violence, just craziness is happening right now. And I want to remind you all that your first line of defense is always your ancestors. Always your ancestors. Never question, should I acknowledge my great mothers and my great fathers? Even the Bible says, honor thy mother and thy father that thy days might be long. Voodoo, honor thy great mothers and thy great fathers, thy ancestors, and thy days might be long. Whether you're dealing with a financial request, a love and relationship request, a judicial or law-based request, a career request, a defense and protective request, our ancestors are your first and most personalized line of defense. The sooner you can acknowledge that, can recognize them, can set them up, know how to communicate with them, the sooner and stronger you see absolute life-changing results here and now in this divine moment in time space. Spiritual power lies in its efficacy, its ability to create lasting change and results here and now. Otherwise, it's just philosophy, it's just religion, it's just faith, it's just myth, it's just something people say. If it cannot be applied, it's not real in this moment in time space. That doesn't mean the goodwill, the proverbs, the faithful sayings aren't relatively true. But if they aren't making it to the ground, if your prayers aren't going up and your blessings aren't making it back to the ground, then we all feel a sense of unfulfillment. We all feel a sense of something more. Something needs to be applied. Something needs to be addressed. Something needs to be fixed. So that is your strongest front, is to shore up your ancestors, particularly that which is unknown. Often those unknown ancestors are doing a great deal of work. Just in counting the relationship of ancestors between now, where and who we are now, versus how many generations of ancestors exist between here, the New World, and then West Africa in the Middle Passage, over 360 or 380 sets of grandparents who have no names often, who have no footprint or energy often in our practice, in our minds, as we're doing our work. And so we tend to focus on those who we know, Big Mama, Big Papa, who we loved and adored, and of course, those who did harm, those who did wrong. And the truth is that what we're doing transcends those individuals, transcends us as just an individual. And then we all become conduits for a much bigger, much greater lattice work of energy. And it is in doing our ancestral work that we are pulling from. Those ancestors, those people have been here since the beginning of time. We think about going back to the motherland. Think about going back to the beginning of time. And how many animal ancestors are in your bloodline? How many mineral ancestors are in your bloodline? How many insect ancestors are in your bloodline? How many alien, otherworldly ancestors are indeed in your bloodline? It's worthy of our thought. It's worthy of our time and our consideration. It's worthy of our meditation. So I'm going to skedaddle. I got so much to do, so much on my plate. All is truly and indeed a blessing until next time. And remember, ancestors see me, ancestors see you, ancestors see all. Respect the voodoo. Respect the voodoo. Did I say respect the voodoo? Respect the voodoo.